For decades, science treated loneliness as a melancholic byproduct of being alone. Recent epidemiological data reveals that it functions as a primary survival alarm, one that has gone haywire in modern human populations. This bar chart shows the physical stakes of that alarm. Chronic loneliness carries a 30% increase in all-cause mortality, a risk factor for early death statistically comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The damage extends to cognitive architecture. For individuals in the highest decile of loneliness, the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease increases 2.1-fold compared to those in the lowest decile. A purely subjective perception, the feeling of being isolated, generates these objective, quantifiable, and lethal physical outcomes. Diagnosing this crisis requires strict parameters. Colloquially, we conflate several distinct states of being alone, but the philosopher Hannah Arendt provided a framework to isolate the specific phenomenon of loneliness. We must first separate it from social isolation, which is a strictly objective metric of social contact. We must also distinguish it from solitude, a voluntary, restorative state where an individual keeps themselves company and thought. Loneliness, or Verlassenheit, is the condition in which an individual feels deserted by human companionship and their own self. It is a state of functional distress. The danger of this state is the internal psychological severing of the individual from the common world, regardless of their physical proximity to others. Under the evolutionary theory of loneliness, physical isolation meant certain death for ancestral humans. Without the tribe, individuals were completely defenseless against predation and starvation. This anatomical map shows how the brain adapted to prevent that isolation. It highlights the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, two regions responsible for processing physical pain. The brain co-opted these exact circuits to create aversive social pain when we become disconnected. When an individual experiences social exclusion, the brain processes it as an acute physical injury, sounding a biological alarm that demands a return to the group. The heartache of feeling lonely is a literal evolutionary pain response. It is a signal designed to force the human animal back into the protective perimeter of the tribe. Evolutionary logic suggests that loneliness should drive us towards others, yet chronically lonely people often do the opposite, actively avoiding the very interactions they crave. This flowchart maps the regulatory loop. The alarm activates the amygdala, triggering hypervigilance to scan for social danger. This creates a cognitive bias, interpreting neutral cues, like a missed call, as hostile rejections. To avoid hostility, the individual withdraws, pushing partners away and reinforcing isolation. Simultaneously, the brain's reward system dampens. This leads to social anhedonia, where reduced dopamine activity makes socializing feel exhausting rather than rewarding. Once the alarm is triggered, the lonely brain is wired to prioritize safety over connection, trapping the individual in a self-sabotaging survival mode. That survival mode cascades from brain chemistry into the endocrine system. Chronic perceived isolation continuously activates the HPA axis, flooding the body with cortisol. This DNA model shows the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. Genetic expression shifts. Pro-inflammatory genes trend upward, while antiviral genes are suppressed. Prolonged cortisol exposure makes cells resistant to anti-inflammatory signals, causing out-of-control inflammation linked to coronary heart disease and metabolic syndrome. Loneliness causes functional changes in our gene expression, translating a psychological perception into a cardiovascular and neurological crisis. The sensitivity of this biological alarm is often established in early childhood. Statistical evidence shows a robust correlation between insecure attachment styles and adult loneliness, where early experiences of rejection keep the hypervigilance loop active. Beyond the individual, modern social organization amplifies this baseline vulnerability. Sociologists use Emil Durkheim's concept of anomie to describe the emotional disorientation that occurs when collective social bonds weaken in urban neoliberal societies. Modern cities pack millions of people into high spatial density, yet they often suffer from low emotional density. The emphasis on self-reliance strips these environments of the traditional frameworks that once buffered against disconnection. This creates a global paradox. Loneliness is often higher in collectivistic cultures than in individualistic ones. In societies where family integration is a rigid expectation, any failure to meet that social ideal is felt as a profound catastrophe. Between urban anonymity and cultural pressure, modern society is structurally engineered to trigger our evolutionary alarm, creating an epidemic of isolation within massive crowds. Because loneliness is an internal regulatory loop of threat, mere proximity to others cannot cure it. The brain's defenses effectively block the nutrients of connection, leaving the individual starving in the midst of plenty. Clinical interventions are required to dismantle these defenses. Cognitive behavioral therapy identifies and corrects the automatic negative thoughts that drive social avoidance and hypervigilance. Internal family systems therapy provides a framework for inner reconciliation. By building self-compassion, the individual can quiet the biological alarm and reduce the desperation for external validation. Before an individual can successfully connect outward, they must perform the work of disarming their internal biological alarm. Once that internal capacity is restored, the environment must support connection. Digital platforms often rely on parasocial relationships, one-sided ties that fail the multisensory biological litmus test for true intimacy. We require structured physical rituals. Activities like choirs or volunteering synchronize movement and focus, triggering oxytocin release and shifting the individual's attention away from the self and toward a shared mission. Addressing this crisis means returning to the philosopher Hannah Arendt's concept of a common world. We need societal infrastructure that values presence and emotional attunement over sheer proximity. Loneliness is a vital signal of our human interdependence. Surviving it means acknowledging the alarm, dismantling the internal defenses, and transforming our hyper-connected wilderness back into a shared world.